The night my brother slapped me in front of 50 people, my mother clapped and laughed. That was the moment I realized, they weren't humiliating me, they were warning me. Because deep down, they already knew the secret I was about to uncover. The one that would destroy them all. Hi, my name is Elena Moore, and I'm 32 years old. If you'd asked me a few months ago what family meant, I'd have said it's the place you go when the world turns cold. But that was before I realized, sometimes, the coldest place is your family. For 3 years, I've lived alone in a modest apartment in Boston, working as a financial analyst for a mid-sized firm. I like the quiet here, the steady rhythm of my own breathing, the hum of the heater, the sound of rain against my window. There are no raised voices. No slammed doors. No one reminding me that my brother, Ryan, was born to lead, and I was too emotional to understand business. That morning, I was sorting through bills and bank statements when I found it. An envelope slipped under my apartment door. Cream-colored, gold-edged, thick enough to carry more weight than paper should. The handwriting stopped me cold. My mother's handwriting. Perfect cursive. Elegant. Controlling. Elena, we hope you'll join us for a special Thanksgiving dinner. 3 p.m., family home. Love, Mom. Love. The word hit harder than any insult she'd ever thrown. It had been 3 years since I'd heard from them. 3 years since I'd walked out of that house in Tenafly, New Jersey, after Ryan screamed at me for refusing to fund his doomed startup, and my parents backed him like he was the golden boy who could do no wrong. That night, my father Charles had looked me dead in the eye and said, "You'll regret turning your back on your family." Maybe I did for a while. But I built my own life, without their money, without their approval, without their endless strings attached. Now, suddenly, this letter. A dinner invitation? On Thanksgiving? From people who couldn't even text me when I was in the hospital 2 years ago for pneumonia? For an hour, I just stared at the envelope on my counter. Was this reconciliation? Or was it bait? Part of me wanted to rip it apart and forget it ever arrived. But another part, the one that still remembered being 10 years old, hiding behind the kitchen counter while my parents and Ryan laughed in the other room, whispered, "Maybe this time, they'll see you." So I made a choice. Not to forgive them, but to face them. That night, I booked a 9:05 a.m. Northeast Regional train to New Jersey. If I was going to be humiliated again, it wouldn't be as the same naive girl who once begged for their approval. It would be as the woman they underestimated, for the last time. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and cold. I packed light, just a black coat, a small handbag, and the red dress my mother always hated. She once said, "It makes you look desperate, Elena, like someone trying too hard to be seen." I smiled at the memory as I slipped it on. This time, I wanted to be seen. The train ride was quiet, except for a woman across from me crying softly into a Starbucks napkin. I didn't ask what was wrong. We all have our reasons. By the time I reached Tenafly, the sky had turned heavy with clouds. The air smelled like frost and old memories. And when I finally stepped out of the cab in front of that house, the same white colonial mansion where I'd grown up, my stomach twisted. It looked exactly the same, yet entirely different. The flower beds were neat. The porch was spotless. But the welcome sign that used to read, "All are welcome," was gone. The new one read, "Family first, always." I almost laughed. Because in the Moore family, family first meant truth last. Before I could knock, the door opened. A young man in a black vest and white shirt, clearly hired help, looked at me blankly. "Name, please?" he asked, holding a tablet. "Elena Moore." He nodded without a smile and stepped aside. The house smelled of roasted turkey and rosemary, just like every Thanksgiving when I was a child. For a second, I almost felt like I belonged. Then I saw the people inside, and remembered I didn't. My mother, Brenda, stood across the room with a glass of red wine, surrounded by guests, her laughter bright and hollow. My father sat in his armchair, talking politics with 2 men I didn't recognize. And Ryan, my brother, the golden boy himself, was right there at the center of it all, charming, confident, perfectly dressed in a navy blazer. When his eyes landed on me, he smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Well, look who decided to crawl back," he said. I didn't crawl, I replied calmly. I walked. Same difference. My mother turned just in time to hear that. Oh, Elena, she said, loud enough for everyone nearby to turn. Her tone was syrupy sweet, her smile too wide. You look different. I smiled back. Independent does that to people. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, annoyance, maybe even fear, but she quickly masked it with that perfect social grin. Come in, dear. You must be exhausted from whatever it is you've been doing all this time. I handed my coat to one of the staff members and made my way to the far end of the dining room, where no one would notice me. But deep down, I already knew something wasn't right. This wasn't a reunion. It was an ambush wearing a smile. And I was the only one who didn't know the script. By the time everyone sat down for dinner, the room felt like a stage. All polished silverware, fake smiles, and conversations rehearsed for appearances. The scent of roasted turkey, cinnamon glaze, and wine filled the air, but beneath it lingered something else. Tension, sharp and sour, like smoke before a fire. I took my seat at the far end of the long mahogany table, beside an empty chair that looked like it had been placed there on purpose. Just close enough to be seen, but far enough to remind me I didn't belong. The laughter flowed around me like a current I couldn't enter. Every time I tried to speak, someone else's voice cut through. Ryan, tell everyone about your new contract, my father said proudly. Ryan leaned back, confident. It's nothing big, he said, pretending to be humble. Just an expansion deal with Silverline Designs. We're launching in 2 new cities. Oh, darling, don't be modest, my mother beamed. You've worked so hard for this. I bit the inside of my cheek. Silverline Designs, the company I had warned them about 3 years ago. The same one flagged for fraud in their financials. I wanted to ask if they ever did the due diligence I once begged them to do. But I stayed silent. Dinner went on. Plates clinked. Wine glasses shimmered under chandelier light. I felt their eyes slide past me as if I were just another chair at the table. It wasn't the first time they'd made me invisible. But tonight, it stung differently, because I knew I was only invisible until they wanted me to be a target. Then it happened. My mother stood slowly, lifting her wine glass. The chatter softened as she tapped the rim with her fork. Once, twice, until the entire room fell silent. Her smile stretched like a practiced performance. Before dessert, she began, her voice smooth and deliberate, I just want to say how thankful I am. She looked around, hand pressed dramatically against her heart. For family, for loyalty, for those who understand their place. A low murmur of polite laughter circled the table. I felt her eyes on me before I looked up. She didn't glance past me, she looked straight at me. In every family, she continued, there comes a time when one of us forgets our roots. When success makes us arrogant, and pride makes us blind. The air grew heavy. The guests' smiles faded into discomfort. My throat went dry, but I didn't move. I knew exactly where this was going. Some people, she said softly, think that money makes them better than blood. But money doesn't buy respect, or love. Another chuckle rolled through the room. My father nodded approvingly. And then, the final cut. Entitlement, she said, pausing to savor the word, is ugly. Especially in family. The room went silent. Then I heard it, a slow, mocking clap. Ryan. 1, 2, 3, deliberate, echoing claps. He smirked at me. That's Mom's best one yet, he said. The crowd laughed nervously, unsure if it was safe to join in. I rose slowly from my chair. The scrape of wood against marble sliced through the silence. I think I've lost my appetite, I said quietly. My voice didn't shake. But before I could step away, something exploded across my face. A sharp, brutal sound, flesh against skin. My head snapped to the side. My cheek burned, the taste of copper flooding my mouth. I blinked, disoriented, and then I saw him. Ryan. Hand still raised, eyes blazing, breathing heavy. For a split second, no one moved. Then, from across the table, my mother let out a light laugh, an elegant, cruel laugh, and started clapping. Finally, she said, her voice sharp with satisfaction. Someone had to teach her a lesson. Gasps erupted around the table, but no one intervened. My father leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. "Serves you right," he muttered. I stood frozen. The room spun in slow motion, the glitter of the chandelier, the sound of someone's spoon dropping, the blur of faces trying not to look at me. My heart pounded, but my tears refused to fall. I set my napkin gently on the table and looked directly at Ryan. "Thank you," I said softly. He frowned. "For what?" "For proving everything I ever said about this family." And with that, I turned and walked out. No one stopped me. No one called my name. The night air hit my face like ice, cooling the fire still burning in my cheek. I didn't wipe the blood on my lip. I wanted to feel it, the sting, the heat, the truth. As I stood on the porch, the laughter resumed inside, faint and hollow. That was when it hit me, the sharp, painful clarity of it all. I hadn't lost my family tonight. I just realized. I never really had one. I pulled out my phone, my hand steady, my pulse calm. I scrolled to the bottom of my contact list, to 3 names I'd saved years ago and hoped I'd never need to call. I tapped the first one. A deep voice answered after 2 rings. "Dylan Pierce speaking." I looked up at the cold night sky and said, "It's time." The next morning, Boston sunlight spilled through my apartment windows, soft and cold, like nothing had happened. But something had, something irreversible. My cheek still stung faintly when I touched it, a fading mark of humiliation that no amount of makeup could cover. I didn't try to hide it. Some scars are meant to remind you never to go back. That night, when I told Dylan Pierce it's time, I knew exactly what I was setting in motion. I'd met Dylan years ago when I was still handling my family's financial paperwork. Back then, he was the kind of attorney who didn't say much, the type who listened more than he spoke, who read between the lines. He'd once warned me, never sign anything you don't fully understand, even if it's family. I didn't listen then. I would now. The phone buzzed as he picked up. "Elena," he said calmly, voice firm but quiet. "Are you sure you want to open that door?" "They opened it for me last night," I said. "I'm just walking through it." He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. "Send me everything you still have," he said. "Bank records, trust details, the more foundation papers, all of it." "I still have copies," I replied. "Every single file they thought I deleted." There was a pause. "Then we start today." I hung up and took a slow breath before dialing the second number. Maya Torres. She was a forensic accountant I'd worked with back when I handled due diligence for corporate audits. Sharp, relentless, and allergic to corruption. The kind of woman who could find a hidden dollar in a billion-dollar lie. She answered immediately. "Elena? It's been years." "I know," I said. "I wouldn't call unless it mattered." "What's going on?" "I need you to trace fund movements from a private family foundation, More Family Foundation. Look for irregular transfers over the past 3 years." "Internal or external fraud?" "Both," I said. "And I want everything, even if it leads back to my own blood." Her tone hardened. "Send me the files. I'll make this my top priority." By the time I ended that call, my heart was pounding, not from fear but from purpose. For the first time in years, I felt awake. Then came the third number. Rachel Dunn. Rachel and I met years ago when she worked as a junior analyst at the IRS. I'd helped her expose a corporate client hiding offshore accounts. We became friends in a strange way, bound by a shared disgust for deceit. After her promotion, she'd said, "If you ever find yourself standing against liars, call me. Just make sure you have proof." Now I had proof, and a reason. "Rachel," I said as soon as she answered, "I'm invoking that promise." She went silent for a moment. "Tell me." "I have documentation of foundation fraud, charity misuse, and tax evasion, all under the Moore family name." "Who's responsible?" "My parents and my brother," I said, steady. "And they've been using my name to do it." Rachel exhaled. "Elena, that's serious federal ground. You're talking about indictments, not just audits." "I'm aware." Are you ready for that? I looked out the window. The city lights flickered below, hundreds of stories, none of them mine. I've been ready for 3 years. I just didn't know it yet. Then let's do this, she said. Send everything encrypted. Once I review the data, I'll loop in the right people quietly. No one moves until I say so. I ended the call and stared at my reflection in the dark glass of my window. For the first time in a long while, I didn't see the scared, quiet daughter they tried to break. I saw someone new, sharper, colder, alive with something dangerous and freeing, control. Within an hour, the emails were sent. Within 6, the financial threads began to unravel. And by the next morning, the Moore family empire would start bleeding from the inside. At sunrise, I stood by my kitchen window, sipping black coffee as I watched the city wake up. The first message came in from Dylan. Accounts are under review. Power of attorney still valid. You're legally authorized to freeze assets. The second from Maya. You were right. Millions shifted through shell accounts tied to Ryan's company. He's been laundering family foundation money into his personal ventures. And finally, Rachel's message. Internal flag placed. IRS investigation will open discreetly. Don't contact them again until further notice. I smiled faintly. For years, my family told me I was too emotional to play their games. They were wrong. I wasn't too emotional, I was too honest. And now, honesty was my weapon. I picked up my phone one last time, typed a single line to Dylan, and hit send. Freeze everything. The next 48 hours felt like standing in the eye of a storm. Calm on the surface, chaos swirling unseen around me. I went to work as usual, answered emails, smiled through meetings, and no one suspected that somewhere in New Jersey, an entire family's financial foundation was starting to fracture. It began quietly. At 7:15 a.m., Dylan texted. Accounts officially frozen. Transfers blocked. Trustees notified. By noon, the Moore name, once synonymous with influence and untouchable wealth, was on every internal alert system across 3 major banks. Transactions bounced. Credit lines halted. A financial empire built on image began to sink under the weight of its own secrets. That evening, as the Boston skyline glowed gold and fading blue, I sat on my couch with a cup of tea, waiting for the inevitable. And at 8:03 p.m., it came. My phone lit up, Dad. For the first time in years, he was calling me. I let it ring twice before answering. Elena. Charles's voice thundered through the speaker, his calm corporate tone replaced by pure fury. What did you do? I leaned back, crossing my legs. Good evening to you too, Dad. Don't play games with me. The accounts are frozen, all of them. Our trust, our foundation, our foundation. I cut in, feigning innocence. You mean my foundation? The one registered under my name. There was a pause, brief but heavy. You're out of your depth, he warned. No, I said quietly, I just stopped drowning. Before he could answer, I hung up. The next call came minutes later. Ryan. Elena, what the hell did you do? His voice cracked between anger and panic. You had no right, no right. I interrupted. You used my name to commit tax fraud. You stole from a charity fund meant for children. You've been laundering money into your own company for years, Ryan. So tell me again, who's got no right? You don't know what you're talking about, he snapped. Oh, I do. Maya found the transfers. Every last one. You were sloppy. You always were. He went silent. I could almost hear the blood draining from his face. Elena. Please. Don't do this, he said finally, voice softer now. We can fix it. I'll handle everything. No, I replied. You'll finally face everything. I hung up again. For the rest of that night, my phone buzzed with missed calls and messages. From my parents, from their lawyers, even from my mother's social circle trying to mediate. I ignored them all. At 2:30 a.m., a final message arrived from my mother. I warned you not to come back. You've made a terrible mistake. I stared at it for a long time before replying. No, Mom. I just corrected one. The next morning, the news broke internally in the business circuit. More family foundation under review for financial discrepancies. It wasn't public yet, but the whispers had begun. Clients started pulling out of deals. Silent partners demanded statements. By noon, Dylan called again. "It's escalating," he said. "Once the audit begins, they'll panic. Expect them to try and discredit you." "They already did," I said. "Years ago. I'm still standing." But what he said next froze me for a moment. "Elena, there's something else. The paperwork, the trust documents you signed years ago, some of them were forged." My stomach dropped. "Forged?" "Yes. They replicated your signature. It looks like they used your name to authorize transactions you never approved." I pressed my hand against my forehead, eyes closing. "That's federal fraud." "Yes," he said. "And if this surfaces, it won't just ruin them, it'll incriminate them. But we'll need more evidence to prove intent." I stood up, pacing. "Then I'll find it. There has to be something, emails, backups, someone who knew what they were doing." That's when I remembered her. Margaret Hale, my late Aunt Claire's oldest friend. Aunt Claire had once told me, "If you ever need the truth about this family, Margaret will help you find it." Back then, I thought she was being dramatic. Now, it sounded like a message from the grave. I called Dylan back. "I think I know who might have the missing piece." "Be careful," he said. "If you're right, that evidence could bury them, but it could also make you a target." I smiled faintly. I've been their target my whole life. The next day, I booked a train to Newark County. I didn't know it then, but what Margaret Hale would give me, the single USB drive she'd been guarding for years, would not just confirm my family's crimes. It would change everything. The following morning, the air in Boston carried that peculiar winter sharpness, the kind that feels clean, almost sterile, as if the city itself knows a secret and won't share it. I barely slept. Dylan's words kept echoing in my mind. The paperwork was forged. It meant everything I had believed about my family's cruelty was still only the surface. Beneath it was a deliberate, calculated crime. I took an early train to Newark County, the kind of trip that feels heavier than its distance. In my bag, I carried a single envelope with copies of the trust documents, the ones with my fake signature. The ink might have fooled others, but I knew my own handwriting. The loops were too wide, the angle too controlled. It was a forgery done by someone who knew me intimately. When I stepped off the train, a faint drizzle had begun. Gray sky, empty station, the world strangely quiet. Margaret Hale lived in a modest brick townhouse just off Elm Street, the opposite of everything my family had built their image on. She opened the door before I even knocked. Older now, hair silver, eyes still sharp. "Elena Moore," she said with a knowing smile. "Claire told me you'd come someday." Her words stopped me cold. "She said that?" Margaret nodded. "Your aunt saw things clearly long before anyone else did." Inside, her house smelled faintly of old books and peppermint tea. Family photos lined the shelves, but none of my family. That was how I knew she'd once chosen loyalty to truth over loyalty to blood. She poured me tea and set a small wooden box on the table between us. "Claire made me promise to give this to you," she said. "But only if you ever asked the right question." I frowned. "And what question is that?" Margaret's lips curved into a sad smile. "You just did, by showing up." She slid the box toward me. Inside lay a USB drive, wrapped in faded red ribbon. Beside it, a handwritten note. "Elena, if you're reading this, it means they finally went too far. The truth has a way of hiding in plain sight, but I left the lights on for you. Aunt Claire." My fingers trembled slightly as I held the drive. "What's on it?" Margaret leaned back. "Recordings. Documents. Things your father and mother didn't want anyone to see. Claire helped manage part of the Moore Foundation before she got pushed out. She kept copies of everything." My chest tightened. Why didn't she come forward? "She tried," Margaret said softly. "But she got sick. And your father made sure no one listened." Silence hung between us. Outside, Rain tapped the windows like an impatient rhythm. When I finally plugged the USB into my laptop later that night in a Newark motel, I didn't breathe for a full minute. My screen filled with folder names /more foundation / private trust / 2013 recorded meeting /. I clicked the recording first. The audio was grainy, the voices faint but unmistakable. Charles Moore, move the funds under Elena's authorization. She'll sign anything if you tell her it's for tax compliance. Brenda Moore, and if she asks questions? Charles, then she's the scapegoat. We can spin it easily, naive daughter, emotional, careless. Ryan, laughing faintly, guess she's useful for something after all. I froze. My breath caught somewhere between a gasp and disbelief. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had built their empire on my name. When the recording ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the laptop screen. My hands were cold. My pulse wasn't. I forwarded the audio file to Dylan and Maya, along with every document on that drive. Within minutes, Dylan replied. This is it. This is the smoking gun. Claire just handed you the weapon they forged for you, and turned it against them. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Not relief. Not revenge. Just the quiet satisfaction of finally knowing. I looked down at my aunt's note one last time. The truth has a way of hiding in plain sight, but I left the lights on for you. I whispered into the silence, thank you, Aunt Claire. You just turned on every light. 2 weeks later, the case moved from whispers to walls of marble and oak. The Bergen County Courthouse stood cold against a gray sky, its flag barely moving in the late morning wind. I arrived early, walking through the revolving doors with my attorney, Dylan Pierce, at my side. I wore a dark navy suit, calm, clean, and deliberate. Power doesn't always have to shout. Sometimes it just has to show up. Inside, everything smelled of polished wood and paper. The Moore family sat across the room, perfectly composed in appearance but visibly cracking underneath. My father, Charles, sat rigid, his jaw locked so tight I could almost hear his teeth grind. My mother, Brenda, wore pearls like armor, the same ones she'd flaunted at charity galas paid for with stolen donations. Ryan sat beside them, fingers drumming on the table, pretending he wasn't terrified. The judge, Honorable Judith Wilford, entered, a woman in her early 60s, sharp eyes behind thin glasses. She looked like someone who'd seen every trick in the book and stopped being impressed long ago. Case 2025-14C, the clerk announced. Moore Family Trust versus Elena Moore. Motion to unfreeze family assets. The room went still. Charles's lawyer, Carlton Merritt, rose first. Smooth voice. Too smooth. Your Honor, he began, we are here because my client's daughter, while intelligent, has acted impulsively and vindicatively, freezing family assets on the basis of unverified accusations. This has jeopardized the livelihoods of multiple employees and caused undue harm to the Moore Foundation's reputation. We request immediate reinstatement of Mr. Moore as trustee and the lifting of the freeze. He sat down like a man who thought he'd just delivered poetry. Dylan stood slowly. No theatrics, no flourish, just quiet confidence. Your Honor, the defense will show that Miss Moore's actions were not impulsive but necessary. What she uncovered was not a family disagreement. It was a criminal operation. The judge tilted her head. Proceed. Dylan handed a thick folder to the clerk. These are trust documents bearing forged signatures, Miss Moore's signatures, used to move millions through shell companies under the Moore Foundation's name. Forensic analysis confirms that the handwriting does not match authenticated samples. A ripple moved through the courtroom. Carlton shot to his feet. Forgery accusations are serious, Your Honor. So is evidence, Dylan interrupted calmly. And we have more. He motioned to the technician in the corner. Play Exhibit C. The recording started, that same file from Aunt Claire's drive. The sound of my father's voice filled the room like poison made audible. Charles Moore, move the funds under Elena's authorization. She'll sign anything if you tell her it's for tax compliance. Brenda Moore, and if she asks questions? Charles, then she's the scapegoat. We can spin it easily. Naive daughter, emotional, careless. Ryan, laughing faintly, guess she's useful for something after all. The sound faded, but the silence that followed was deafening. My father's face drained of color. My mother's smile vanished. Even Carlton's confident posture wilted. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Moore, is that your voice?" Charles swallowed hard. It could be doctored. Answer the question. He exhaled. "Yes, it's my voice." That was it. The room shifted. The energy changed. Judge Wilford spoke, tone icy but controlled. "This court finds sufficient cause to maintain the freeze on the Moore Family Trust. Furthermore, I am referring this matter for federal investigation under suspicion of fraud, embezzlement, and perjury." She looked directly at me then, just for a moment, and nodded slightly as if to say, "You did the right thing." The gavel struck. Court adjourned. As soon as the sound echoed, chaos erupted behind me. My father stood abruptly, his voice sharp and venomous. "You think you've won, Elena?" I turned to face him, calm, steady. "No," I said softly. "I think I've begun." He didn't answer. His mouth opened, then shut. Ryan looked down at the floor. My mother just stared silent. The same woman who once clapped while her son slapped her daughter, now unable to meet my eyes. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world smelled of wet pavement and new beginnings. I didn't wait for anyone. I just walked, through the courthouse doors, down the steps, into the cool wind that no longer felt heavy. That was the day the empire cracked. And it wasn't thunder or chaos that broke it. It was silence, my silence, finally turning into truth. It happened 2 mornings later, the kind of morning that tricks you with calm before chaos. The air over Tenafly, New Jersey, was still damp from last night's drizzle. A thin mist rolled between the trees, and from the street, the Moore estate looked untouched. The same white-columned house that had hosted dozens of charity dinners, staged family photos, and concealed more lies than walls could bear. But at 7:32 a.m., the peace shattered. 3 loud knocks echoed across the marble foyer, followed by a doorbell that refused to stop. When my brother Ryan opened the door, he was greeted not by a neighbor or courier, but by 4 agents in dark blue jackets. The letters on their backs read IRS, Federal Enforcement Division. The lead agent, a woman with clipped gray hair and sharp eyes, held up her badge. "Mr. Ryan Moore?" He froze. "Yes, what's this about?" "We have a federal warrant to search and seize financial records related to the Moore Family Trust and Moore Foundation." Behind her, 2 more agents stepped forward with rolling evidence bins, gloves already on. Ryan stammered, "This is a mistake." "My father, we're aware of who your father is," the agent said flatly. "Step aside, sir." By the time my parents came down the stairs, the agents were already inside. My mother's silk robe dragged across the floor as she gasped, "Charles, do something." My father stormed forward, his voice booming. "This is absurd. You can't just barge in here." The lead agent handed him the document. "Warrant signed by Judge Wilford. You can contact your counsel, but the search proceeds." That sentence broke something in him. He stood there for a long moment, eyes blazing, before muttering, "Witch hunt," and walking away. From my apartment in Boston, I wasn't there to see it, but I didn't need to be. Dylan texted me a photo, agents carrying boxes labeled Trust Records, 2011 to 2024. Underneath, his message read, "It's happening." I stared at the image for a long moment. The sunlight pouring into my kitchen felt different. Not warm exactly, but honest. Like the light finally knew where to shine. By afternoon, whispers had already reached the business circuit. The Moore name, once synonymous with success, was now linked with fraud investigation, embezzlement, and misuse of charitable funds. Ryan's company stock plummeted overnight. My father's associates started pulling away. That evening, I received an unexpected call. Not from lawyers or reporters, but from Brenda Moore, my mother. I answered, more out of curiosity than emotion. Her voice came through brittle and shaking. "You humiliated us," she said. "You've destroyed this family." I leaned against the counter, calm. No, Mom. I just showed the world what you built it on. You'll regret this, she hissed. We gave you everything. I almost laughed. You gave me lessons in how not to become you. She hung up before I could say more. For the first time in my life, her silence didn't sting. It felt like closure. Later that night, I stood by the window, watching snow drift slowly through the Boston air. The city lights blurred into soft halos of gold. My reflection stared back at me, a face I barely recognized, stronger, quieter, finally unafraid. Then came another sound, the chime of my doorbell. When I opened the door, Ryan stood there. No tailored suit this time. Just jeans, a wrinkled coat, and a face that looked like it hadn't slept in days. He didn't speak right away. Just stood there, the cold wind behind him. Can I come in? He asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. He walked to the center of the living room, hands shaking. They took everything, he said. The house, the accounts. Even Mom's jewelry. It's all gone. I know, I said quietly. They brought it on themselves. He looked up, eyes red. You think I didn't suffer too? I met his gaze. No, Ryan. You enjoyed it, until you realized the house you were defending was built on sand. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. You always had to be right. No, I said. I just refused to be wrong with the rest of you. He looked at me for a long time, something breaking behind his eyes. Then he whispered, Dad's going to prison, you know. You could have stopped this. I took a step closer. No, Ryan. He could have stopped this. Years ago, when he decided to use my name like a shield. He didn't answer. Just nodded once hollow, and walked out the door. No goodbye. No apology. When the door closed, I stood there in silence. The air felt lighter. The world quieter. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to them, I was free from them. I walked back to my desk, where a single letter sat, the one Dylan had delivered earlier that day. The header read, Federal case, more trust, formal indictment confirmed. Beneath it, a single line. You are no longer under investigation. All actions deemed lawful and protective under whistleblower immunity. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with relief. The Moors had fallen. And the silence that once drowned me was now the sound of justice. A week after the indictment, life settled into a strange, almost sacred quiet. The noise that used to fill my days, the constant worry, the defensive thoughts, the invisible tension of walking on family-made glass, had vanished. What remained was the sound of coffee brewing in my kitchen each morning and the steady rhythm of peace finding its way back into my life. Then one evening, as snow piled softly outside my apartment window, I found a letter in my mailbox, thick, cream-colored, sealed with red wax. No sender. No markings. Just my name written in looping cursive, to Elena Moore. Inside was a small folded note and a USB drive. For a moment, I just stared at it. The handwriting tugged at something deep in memory. Elegant, deliberate, familiar. My heart stopped when I realized whose it was. My grandfather, Henry Moore. He died when I was in college, years before all of this began. He was the only one who ever looked at me and saw more than the emotional one. He used to tell me, one day Elena, truth will come looking for you. Make sure you're brave enough to open the door. I sat on the couch, the envelope trembling slightly in my hands, and unfolded the letter. My dear Elena, if you are reading this, then what I feared most has already come to pass. I have watched your parents turn everything I built into something hollow, charity twisted into greed, love turned into leverage. I saw how they diminished you because they feared what they could never control, your integrity. So I did what I could quietly. There is a separate trust, one they know nothing about, held in Vermont. It was meant for the one person who would carry this family's name with decency. That person is you. The key and the documents are on the drive enclosed. Everything in Vermont, the land, the investments, the foundation, belongs to you. Don't use it for revenge, Elena. Use it to rebuild what they destroyed. Build something that lasts longer than anger. Grandpa Henry *. My throat tightened as I read those last words. That phrase, longer than anger. It was what he used to whisper to me during summer storms when thunder made me hide under blankets. I slid the USB into my laptop, and a video began to play. There he was, my grandfather, sitting in his Vermont cabin, wrapped in his old wool cardigan, the fireplace crackling behind him. "If you're watching this, kiddo," he began softly, "then they finally did what I always knew they might. I'm sorry I couldn't stop it. But you've done what I never had the courage to. You stood up to them." He smiled faintly, eyes tired but warm. "Everything I built, every honest dollar, every acre, it's yours now. I made sure it bypasses your parents entirely. It's legally sealed, witnessed, notarized. They can't touch it. Use it to build something real, not just for you, but for others who were silenced by people like them. Don't waste your life proving them wrong, Elena. Just live like you were right all along." The screen went black. I sat there, tears finally spilling, not from pain but from release. I'd spent years fighting to expose what my family had done, never realizing that somewhere in the background, my grandfather had already been fighting for me. Quietly. Faithfully. That night, I booked a train to Vermont. The next morning, I arrived to find the cabin exactly as I remembered it. Wooden, still, smelling faintly of cedar and smoke. The key from the envelope fit perfectly in the old door. Inside were boxes labeled "More Legacy" and "Education Trust." My name was written on each one. I walked to the fireplace, lit a small flame, and set my grandfather's letter on the mantel. The paper curled gently as the firelight reflected in my eyes. He had left me not just property, but purpose. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about rewriting the meaning of the Moore name, from deceit to redemption, from power to principle. That night, under the Vermont sky heavy with stars, I made myself a promise. I would use what he left me not to destroy what was broken, but to build what should have been. By spring, the snow in Vermont had melted into soft mud and rivers of thawed memory. The cabin that once belonged to my grandfather now echoed with a new kind of energy. Not ghosts, not guilt, but purpose. I registered his trust under a new name, the Horizon Grant Foundation. It wasn't about the Moore legacy anymore. That name belonged to greed, not generosity. This was mine, and for everyone who had ever been silenced, underestimated, or humiliated by their own blood. I turned the cabin into the Foundation's first office. No fancy desks, no glass walls, just honesty, hardwood floors, stacks of documents, and sunlight streaming through the same windows my grandfather used to open every morning. The air smelled like pine and possibility. The first grant we issued went to a young woman from Maine, a journalism student who'd been cut off financially after reporting her father's company for embezzlement. When she came to Vermont to thank me in person, I told her, "You don't owe me anything. Just make sure no one can ever silence you again." She cried. I didn't. I'd already cried enough for both of us in another lifetime. By summer, the Horizon Grant Foundation had funded 12 women across the country. Artists, activists, entrepreneurs, all with one thing in common: they refused to stay quiet when wronged. Each of them reminded me of who I used to be, and who I finally became when I stopped apologizing for being right. Then, one late afternoon in June, as golden light filtered through the cabin, I heard a car pull up outside. It was Ryan. He stepped out slowly, dressed simply this time. No expensive suit, no arrogance. Just an older brother carrying the weight of consequences he could no longer outrun. I opened the door before he could knock. "Elena," he said softly. "I read about the foundation. It's good work." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure if it was guilt or sincerity in his voice, and maybe it didn't matter anymore. "I didn't come for forgiveness," he added quickly. "I know I don't deserve that. I just needed to see you doing something that looks like hope. Because everything else we built, it's gone." I studied him carefully. He looked smaller now, not just in posture but in presence. "Hope isn't something you find," I said quietly. "It's something you build, usually after someone burns down what you thought was home." He nodded, eyes glistening. "You sound like Grandpa." I smiled faintly. He'd probably say the same thing about me. We stood there in silence, the kind that used to mean resentment but now simply meant peace. When he turned to leave, He hesitated. "You know," he said, "Mom still thinks you destroyed the family." I looked past him at the trees swaying in the Vermont wind. "No," I said. "I just stopped letting the family destroy me." He gave a weak smile, then walked back to his car and drove off, slowly, quietly, as if afraid the world might hear what he'd become. When the dust settled, I walked back inside and sat at my grandfather's old desk. A stack of new applications waited beside a steaming cup of coffee. On the wall above me hung his words, framed and etched in brass. "Build something that lasts longer than anger." And for the first time in years, I realized I already had. Autumn came early that year, brushing the Vermont hills in amber and fire. The lake beside the cabin mirrored the changing leaves, gold bleeding into red, beauty born from endings. It felt fitting. My life, too, had changed seasons. The Horizon Grant Foundation was thriving now, quiet, deliberate, and profoundly real. We had grown from one woman's rebellion into a network of survivors and builders, all connected by the invisible thread of resilience. Every week, new letters arrived, not from lawyers or auditors, but from women who'd found courage to walk away from abuse, manipulation, and inherited silence. They wrote about small victories, opening a bakery, finishing college, starting over at 40. And every time I read those letters, I felt the same quiet warmth spread through my chest, the kind my grandfather must have felt when he first bought this cabin. A peace that didn't shout, but stayed. I often came here alone. No noise, no interviews, no need to explain myself. The media had long since moved on from the more scandal, as they called it. Reporters had tried to track me down for statements, to turn my story into a headline. But I never spoke publicly. I didn't need to. Silence had once been my punishment. Now, it was my victory. One evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the sun sink behind the mountains. The wooden boards beneath my feet were worn smooth, the same ones my grandfather used to pace when he was thinking. I thought about everything that had led me here, the Thanksgiving dinner, the slap that burned like betrayal, my mother's laughter, my father's denial, Ryan's complicity, and finally, my own awakening. They had built their empire on deceit, and I had built my freedom on truth. We both paid a price, but only one of us gained peace. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I turned, expecting maybe a courier or one of the foundation volunteers. But it was Margaret Hale, my Aunt Claire's old friend, the woman who had given me the USB that changed everything. She looked older now, but her eyes still carried that same gentle defiance. I smiled, genuinely this time. "I was in the area," she said, stepping forward. "Thought I'd see how the cabin's holding up." "It's holding up better than ever," I said. "Come in." Inside, I made us tea, peppermint, the kind she'd always brewed. We sat by the fire, both silent for a while. "You did it," she finally said. "You proved her right, Claire. She always said you'd be the one to end the cycle." I swallowed hard. I just followed the light she left behind. Margaret smiled faintly. "You know, not many people can rise from what you came from without turning bitter." "I tried being bitter," I admitted. "Didn't suit me." We both laughed quietly, the sound blending with the crackle of the fire. When she left later that evening, the cabin felt lighter, as if even the ghosts of the past had finally been given permission to rest. I walked outside and looked up at the night sky. Stars spread across the darkness like a map of every choice that led me here. The cold air carried the faint scent of pine and smoke, and I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not at them. Not at myself. Not even at the silence that had once suffocated me. Because sometimes, silence is where you finally hear your own strength. Before going back inside, I took one last look at the land, my grandfather's gift, my inheritance of truth, and whispered to the wind. I didn't break the family. I just refused to let it break me. And for the first time in my life, I knew the story was over. Not because it ended, but because I had finally written the last line myself.